Good morning again, Green Spring. My guest today on the Who's Who program is Don Young. And Don lives over in Oak Hill with his wife, Diane. He retired from the Navy Reserves as a captain in the Judge Advocate General Corps. And at Green Spring, he's the president of the Republican Club. Good morning, Don. Thank you very much for coming on.
Good morning, Ray. Thank you.
And first, I'd like to hear about your current family, your children, and what are they doing? And
well, of course, there's my wife, Diane, who lives here and is active in various things here at Green Spring, including the Republican Club and the faith-based activities. And I have a son and his family who live about 4 miles from here in Burke. He is a senior civil servant in the threat assessment and preparation arena. Currently stationed with, or not stationed, but currently working for DITRA. Yeah. Right now he's working, heading up a task force at Fort Belvoir. He's also a captain in the Naval Reserve and is the commanding officer of a unit that supports the commander of the 6th Fleet. So his activities, especially in his area of expertise, which is IEDs, take him all over Europe.
The IED is a
improvised explosive device.
And that's what they used in Iraq and so forth to kill many.
Yes, it was. He did 2 tours in one in the Arabian Sea and another tour in Afghanistan, where he was specifically working on IEDs. Oh. As I say, he's a captain in the Naval Reserve. His wife works at North Springfield High School as an assistant to the principal. And his children, his daughter just graduated from the University of South Carolina, and his son will be entering his sophomore year at the University of South Carolina.
Why'd they choose University of South Carolina?
I know why he chose it. I don't know why his children chose it. He chose it because they had 3 consecutive years where Miss America came from the University of South Carolina, and he thought the women down there were gorgeous.
No, I haven't heard that reason before, but it sounds like a better reason than most people.
Made sense to me.
Okay, so you only have one son then?
Only have one son, yes.
And no daughter,
that's our only child.
And you said DITRA. Now, DITRA stands for the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and it's over at Fort Belvoir, and it used to be called the Defense Nuclear Agency.
As I understand it, yes, sir.
So I worked very closely with those people.
That's great.
How about your own family, your own growing up, your dad, your mom? What'd they do, and where did you live?
I grew up in Baltimore, in a town called Dundalk, which is just southeast of Baltimore City. The major employer there was the Bethlehem Steel Corporation, and the town rose up during World War I, a steel company to provide steel to build ships for the Navy in World War I. And that expanded, of course, during World War II. And the Bethlehem Steel Corporation, at their Sparrows Point shipbuilding facility, built a huge number, hundreds of Liberty ships for the Navy. And the Liberty ships were the ones that carried the goods. Yep. They were the cargo ships of World War II.
Now, was that Kaiser? Didn't Kaiser do a lot of?
Kaiser did some of that, and Bethlehem Steel did a lot of it at their Sparrows Point.
So Bethlehem Steel actually was shipbuilding?
Well, they had a steel plant, which eventually became the biggest producer of steel in the world.
But they
provided steel to the shipbuilding facility to build the ships.
Okay.
And the steel plant is still there, but when I was in high school, they employed 33,000 people, and today they make the same amount of steel with less than 3,000 people.
Is that right? But they're still making steel?
Still making steel at Sparrows Point, yes, sir.
In Baltimore?
In Baltimore, just southeast of Baltimore.
Okay, great. I wasn't aware of that. I didn't realize we had such a large plant making steel here?
It used to be the largest private employer in the state of Maryland. Of course, it no longer is because of automation and various other things. My father worked there. My mother had been a school teacher back in the days where you only had to go to college for 2 years, and she went to Towson State Normal School, which was a 2-year teacher's training school. It is now Towson State University. She went there a long time ago and was actually in the classroom when she was 18 years old. She used to tell the story that in her first year of teaching, she went in tears to the principal saying that the only way she could keep the children in the class quiet was to call spelling words. And the principal just pulled his glasses down and looked over his glasses and said, "Well, Anna?" And she got it, went back to the classroom, and for the next 2 solid weeks called spelling words to her class. At age 18, she had a rep. If she did that in the classroom today, she'd probably be pilloried, but she got their attention and had a reputation as being a strict disciplinarian for her entire tenure as a school teacher.
My daughter was small, and she taught math in high school, and so she also had to use things. And her point was, you never start out trying to be friends with these kids. You've got to start out being strict, and you stay strict, and then you can let up maybe a little bit, but not very much.
I think that was my mother's motto.
Well, that was my daughter's motto. All right. Well, so you, what about your schooling?
Well, I graduated from high school at Dundalk High School in Baltimore County Public Schools, and went to the University of Maryland.
Did you have any specialty in high school, or any stories?
Just a normal high school education. I played sports. 1 year I was president of my class, but
what sports did you play?
I played lacrosse.
Okay, which is an unusual, not unusual really, but
it wasn't unusual for Baltimore County at the time. Lacrosse has become a more widespread sport since I played.
And University of Maryland has been a very competitive in it.
They have been in the national championship picture for most of the last dozen or so years.
Yeah.
But at that time, lacrosse was a sport that was primarily played in Long Island, New York, and around the Baltimore area. Why Baltimore, I have no idea. Today they play with plastic sticks. We played with hickory sticks.
Yeah.
And it was a much more physical game when I played, and it was great fun to go out there with a 6-foot hickory stick and whack on somebody. You can hurt somebody with it.
Yeah, you can, yeah.
I also was a swimmer for YMCA Club, and continued swimming when I was at college in the University of Maryland.
Then you went on to University of Maryland and studied, did you study pre-law, or did you study another?
I started out in pre-med, and organic chemistry convinced me that I was never going to be a doctor. So I got out of pre-med and majored in political science with a history minor. Back in those days, all male students had to take both physical education and ROTC. Neither course counted towards your graduation, but at Maryland you got 16 credit hours for your 3 for ROTC a semester and 1 for PE. So the normal requirement then was 140 credit hours to graduate, but I graduated with over 160 credit hours because of all those trash credits, we used to call them, in ROTC. And
so when you graduated from the University of Maryland, you decided to become a lawyer, though. When did you decide to do that?
When I got an A in constitutional law,
So you had to take a law course and
I took several
political
law
science.
courses at Maryland,
yeah.
and I aced con law, which tells you a little bit about my grades at Maryland. But I decided I liked the law, and when I graduated, I got a year in law school at George Washington University.
Ah.
Before I was going to be drafted and went to Naval OCS.
So you took ROTC in the first 2 years in Maryland, and then after graduation you were able to get into OCS in the Navy.
That's correct.
But Maryland had an Air Force ROTC.
Maryland was only Air Force ROTC. Yeah. If you wanted to be commissioned out of that program, it had to be Air Force.
Yeah.
Well, I had, unlike a lot of people, I wasn't inclined to fly, so I didn't take the last 2 years of ROTC. When I graduated from Maryland, I applied to only 2 law schools, Georgetown and GW. I was accepted to both, and I decided to go to George Washington University Law School because they were charging $12 a credit hour, and Georgetown was charging the munificent sum of $14 a credit hour. I tell that to law students today who are paying $60,000 a year to go to those schools, and they just cover their heads and cry.
All right. Well, so you're in the Navy now. How long did you stay? How long did you stay in the Navy?
I was on active duty for just about 10 years, just short of 10 years.
What were some of your assignments?
Well, when I graduated from OCS, I went to communication school and was sent off to the USS Providence, which was the flagship of the 7th Fleet, home ported in Yokosuka, Japan. I spent 2 years aboard the Providence.
Now, that's a cruiser, isn't it?
That was a light
Light
World
cruiser.
War II light cruiser converted to a guided missile cruiser
Oh, okay.
in the 1960s, early 1960s. They carried the Terrier guided missile, and it was a big ship for its time. The carriers we sailed with were the largest was the Forrestal class,
Yeah.
and they were about 50,000 tons, and there weren't very many of those.
So your job on the ship was what?
I was a communicator.
Okay.
And stood communications watches. It was interesting, but I also was ship's company. I was a communicator for the flag because I had additional duty to the flag, but I wasn't on the flag staff. So the
And
ship.
the flag is the admiral.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And the admiral at the time was Thomas Moorer, who eventually became the chief of naval operations and went on to become chairman of Joint Chiefs.
I remember him.
But if we were on ship's company, we were only relieved from watch duty. We stood 48 hours of watch for the flag every week, but then the captain of the ship said, well, you belong to me, so you can't leave the ship. When the regular flag people leave the ship, you got to be here during normal ship's working hours. So it was I had my duty, I had my shipboard duties, so bridge watches underway and CIC watches underway. As one of the ship's officers, but stood my communications watches as a.
Well, we talked about your wife, Diane. When did you meet her?
I met Diane on Lyndon Johnson's inauguration day. When was that?
That was 64 or
Yeah, it was
65.
52 years ago because I've been married 52 years.
That's a good way to figure.
But
65.
she lived at a place called Southern Towers off
down on,
Seminary Road
395.
on 395.
Okay.
The Seminary Tower was called Southern Towers at the time. And we both lived on the same floor, 2 apartments from one another, but didn't know one another. And I was, there was a little 7-Eleven store there, and she was ahead of me in line and left and walked down the pathway to the building and left herself in the building. And I followed her in the doorway and up the steps, and she got to the 3rd floor and went down the hallway, and I got to the 3rd floor and opened the doorway of the hallway, and I said, you know, you might think I'm following you, but I'm not really following you. I live on this floor. And that was the first time we met.
Well, that's
one thing led to another, and you know, being only 2 doors down the hall, like I say, one thing led to another.
That's right. All right. Well, you also got your JD, your let's see, Doctor of Jurisprudence. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay. In '66, so that's why you were on active duty.
I went to night school while I was on Navy active duty, and when I graduated from law school, I converted to the JAG Corps in the Navy and did 2 tours as a JAG officer before I got out.
So but when you got out, then you were a lawyer and you decided to go into practice for yourself? Or?
No, I wanted to go to work for the government, I got a job offer from the Justice Department, but then quite by happenstance, I learned that a classmate of mine was the general counsel of the General Services Administration, so I called him, and he offered me a grade higher than the Justice Department had offered me. So I went to work for GSA.
Okay.
And I became chief of staff to the administrator at GSA and subsequently general counsel there.
Yeah. So you worked for GSA several years, or did you have different jobs or different other agencies?
Well, I worked for GSA during the Nixon and Ford administrations. Jimmy Carter had asked the administrator at the time, Jack Eckert, who owned Eckert Drugstores, to stay on as administrator. And Mr. Eckert called me up and said the president had offered him the job to stay. Would I stay with him? And I called the law firm that I was negotiating with and told him I was going to stay in government. And about a week into the Carter administration, my secretary came over to where I was having lunch and said, the administrator needs to talk to you right away. So I went up to the administrator's office, and he said, well, it just was announced over on the radio that I had resigned as administrator of GSA. He said, I have not resigned. And I didn't know what to say, so I pointed to his telephone, and he said, the number is 456-1414, which is the White House switchboard number. And he called it. And to my never-ending astonishment, Jimmy Carter actually picked up the telephone at the other end of the line.
Is that right?
And Mr. Carter's response to Jack Eckert's protestation of his announcement of his firing was, I'll have Fritz call you in a minute. And Vice President Mondale called and asked Eckert if he would be in his office for 15 minutes, and Eckert said yes. And the letter firing Mr. Eckert was on his desk 15 minutes later. I was not removed from my job at GSA, but I was certainly removed as general counsel.
Yeah.
And reassigned as the counsel to the Federal Preparedness Agency, which was a sub-agency there. That merged into FEMA, and I became the Deputy General Counsel of FEMA. And when Mr. Reagan became president, I was recruited to be the Deputy General Counsel of the Small Business Administration.
Okay, that's how you got into small business.
Yep, and it's just, I never asked for any of these jobs. I was told what I was going to do. But,
okay.
It was all great fun.
You always liked them.
Oh yeah, I had a great time. I had a wonderful career.
Good. You were on the bicentennial task force back in 1976. What was that all about?
It was one of those presidential commissions or councils that set up to perform a specific task. In this case, it was to plan the celebration of the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And there was a small staff. The head of the council or commission was former Senator John Warner, and it was actually before Senator Warner became a senator. He had been the Assistant Secretary, or the Deputy Secretary of the Navy, and moved over to become the head of the Bicentennial Revolution Committee. And he headed up a staff of maybe several dozen people, and it was all about the planning of the celebration, much like we're planning our 20th anniversary celebration here. And it was parades and fireworks and political speeches and one thing and another all over the country. Members of the commission came from everywhere. They came from in government, from local governments. There were several people from Hollywood, and
Well, I can see the Hollywood getting involved because I believe John Warner was married to Elizabeth Taylor about that time.
He was indeed.
So did you get to meet her?
No, I never met Miss.
Okay. All right, well, let's see. Where do we go from there? How about the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation?
Well, the Pennsylvania Avenue Redevelopment Corporation was a group that came about as a result of legislation. For anybody that remembers Pennsylvania Avenue, back in the 1950s and 60s, at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, you could fire a cannon down Pennsylvania Avenue and hit nobody. It was absolutely deserted. It was the home of liquor stores and sleazy bars and restaurants, and it just wasn't a very good place to be. The Willard Hotel had fallen into disrepair and had actually been shuttered. The whole avenue on the north side, the south side of Pennsylvania Avenue, is all government buildings, but the north side is privatized. So the Pennsylvania Avenue Redevelopment Corporation was established for the purpose of redeveloping Pennsylvania Avenue, and indeed it has been redeveloped. Pennsylvania Avenue is now the home of a lot of very prominent buildings. The museum, there's an embassy down there. The Willard Hotel has been completely rebuilt and is now a 5-star hotel. Of course, across the street, the old post office building has been redeveloped into the Trump International Hotel. So instead of being a sleazy place, the rundown urban area, Pennsylvania Avenue is now a vibrant place to be.
Now, was this a result of your or the work of your group?
The commission planned all of that.
Yeah.
They took each site and decided what was going to be on it, and then went about the business of finding people to build what the commission decided should go on that property.
We're down to 3 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Now, you had a private law practice.
I did.
And how long was that?
That was maybe 10 years.
10 years.
I started off practicing law on my own when I retired from the federal government.
So you were able to retire from the federal?
Yep.
You worked there then about 30 years.
My interesting story is I retired from the federal government with 30 years service at the ripe old age of 46 and 6 months. I started when I was at the University of Maryland, 17 years old, working at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center.
Ah, okay.
And never had a break in service for 30 years.
Is that right? Okay.
Then I went into private practice. I was a partner in a Philadelphia law firm and a partner in a Columbus, Ohio law firm. And retired from there in about 2000.
Well, you moved to, since we're running out of time, I think we'll talk a little bit about Green Spring. What caused you to come to Green Spring?
I have some vision problems. I haven't driven for 25 years. And my wife and I decided that this was a place that we'd like to be. We looked around at a number of places, including the Fairfax and Goodwin House, decided that this was best suited for our needs, and moved here 4.5 years ago.
Well, have you enjoyed it here? Is it?
We've enjoyed it. We've had some ups and downs. We've been flooded out twice, which
is that right?
Was not a joyful experience.
No, it didn't. Did you have to move off?
We lived in a hotel for a couple of months on both occasions.
Okay.
But we're back in our apartment now, and hopefully we won't be flooded out again.
I hope not. Well, I guess the Will Brill's apartment had 4 times.
We're in the Brill 4 times.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
incredible.
It is. Okay, so, but, and you became the president of the Republican Club. Now, when talking about your whole life, we really haven't had any discussion that says, well, when you moved here, you're going to become president of the Republican Club.
Now, I was never active in local Republican politics because my life kind of story didn't lend itself to that. But having worked in both the Nixon and Ford administration, I was active in the at that level of government and served on several transition teams, and just became involved in that way, and got to know a lot of White House people in those administrations.
Yeah, I imagine, especially being on the transition team.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Don, thank you very much for coming on Who's Who today. I appreciate it, and I've enjoyed talking with you. And I hope that our Green Spring people have learned a lot more about you as a result.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate it. We have a few announcements. Feature programming, we have the May Resident Council today at 2 and 8 p.m., the Village Church today at 5 and 9 p.m., and Friday on Village in Motion, we're going to talk about men's health. And right after that, you're going to have the Green Spring Troubadour. So don't turn away from it. But so we appreciate you watching today, and it looks like it's going to be a very nice day. Enjoy it. Thank you very much.